Hello, welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Varley, founder and CEO of Project Purple. Today, we are back in the podcast studio here on audio and also on YouTube, and we've got a special guest. We always have special guests here at the Project Purple podcast, but the guy who's been on the podcast more than myself, program manager, Vin Camp. Vin, pleasure having you back on the podcast once again.
Back on the podcast. Love being on here. Thanks for having me. As we've talked about it before, this is one of my events that is near and dear to my heart. So happy to be on and to be able to talk about this race coming up in a couple weeks.
So if you haven't guessed it, this is the Chicago Marathon 2022 course preview and also Project Purple preview for our runners. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I dressed appropriately. I'm in my purple jacket. This is not the same jacket that I wear on race day because it's a little short, but it does the job here in the studio. And I promise we will be decked out in purple if you come to the Chicago Marathon, the London Marathon this year, and the New York City Marathon. You will definitely see staff in the bright purple. So welcome to this podcast. We're excited to kind of break it down for our team and for the public, the course. We're going to be going over the course. But before we get there, Vin, let's talk about the pre. And we're going to go at this a little bit different than we've done in the past because this is going to air before. So for our team listening, we are doing a special meet and greet. We won't give out the location because we don't want the general public showing up. I don't think that would be cool. No offense to anyone out there in the public, but it is a team event. But so we are doing a meet and greet the Saturday before for our team, for their friends and family. It's kind of our way to say thank you and celebrate and enjoy the special moment with our team. Vin, I know don't give it away. You were at the site with me a couple weeks back. Pretty cool space.
It's going to be a nice place. It's going to be, let's just say there's a lot of views. You're going to be able to see a lot of things from where we are. And hopefully the weather cooperates because I think that time of year we might get some extra special views coming in. So definitely a great site. So if you're on the team, I don't want to say you have to be there, but do everything you can to try to stop by. We want to meet you. Number one, we want to get to know you and thank you for everything that you've done. But the venue is a very, very well put together venue. I'm happy to be there. Excited to actually get to enjoy it.
I think you summed that up perfectly. And we are going to have a gift for everyone. So that's the other reason why you want to come, is because if you don't show up, you're not going to get the gift. But we've got a special gift for all of our runners. And we're really excited. I probably can sense it in my voice. This time of year, this is where the rubber meets the road for us. It is our time to shine for our runners. They're on stage. We're there to support them, make sure they're the loudest, the best. And we cannot wait. So Saturday, we've got our meet and greet. It's going to happen from 1 to 5. And then, at night, and I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but let's talk about this. You ran Chicago for your first marathon. I've run Chicago. I've done 9 other marathons, excuse me. But let's talk about just some pre-stuff, and I think is important. Naturally, we're not going to dive into any training here because at this point, Coach John likes to say the hay is in the barn. So nagging injuries, all that stuff, like that's not going to go away, in 24 hours. So this is really getting prepared for that night, getting prepared for that day, I should say, for Sunday, Marathon Sunday. What are some of the things, Vin, in your experience and personally, and then also from a runner's perspective, because you've been around here now 5 years, that are some like best practices to use that night before?
Yeah. So for me, I was an athlete growing up. I played baseball, football, basketball, and we always had that pre-game routine, where we'd have the pasta or the carb loading, before dinner or before the race day, before the game. I think that's something that is good to do the day before or the night before. I know at all of our dinners that we used to have, it was, have some kind of carb, have that pasta. Pasta was always served. It just gives you that little bit of energy, for the next day. You don't really want to, change what you're doing. From a runner standpoint, I was extremely nervous. I think, you can probably remember, at that dinner, I was a little out of ordinary, at the dinner that we had, in 2019. But it was, hey, have a drink, have a glass of wine, have a beer. It's not gonna, kill you. It's gonna relieve that tension. It's something that, do something that you can, that's going to help relieve the stress, especially if this is a first time for you. There's the anxiety, the stress is going to be somewhat high, especially speaking from my experience. I needed just to do something to get my mind off of, the race, to be around team, family, friends. I did go for a little walk that night to see Chicago. I mean, it wasn't far. I didn't want to give my legs too much. But I did go walk down to the rivers and just took in some of the sights, and, I lucked out and had good weather. So we were able to do that. But those are, things that I would say. And then the night before, when you get back to your hotel room or your Airbnb, wherever you are, lay your clothes out, was a piece of advice that I got. Was, so when you wake up in the morning, it's going to be a rough night's sleep, potentially. You're going to be anxious. You might be awake here or there. I woke up thinking I was going to miss my alarm, to miss getting into the corral, that type of stuff. But if you have your gear, your food, your gels, your packs, whatever you're doing, lay them out the night before. That way, when you wake up, everything's there. You get it on, you pack up, and you're ready to go. Would be, a couple of my top, tips, for, experienced and first timers out there.
Yeah, I think you bring up some great points, man. And I'm taking notes, as I always do here, and I'm not going to repeat any, but I'm just going to caveat what you said. The one thing, like, no one ever sleeps. I've never had a great sleep the night before a marathon. I think like once. But this is the other thing that we have to realize too, is your time doesn't start until you cross that start line. So stressing about getting up, as much as this happens, I don't know if this helps, but even if you don't get off in the right time, you're still going to run the race.
Right.
And your time is your time. It's not the time that, and that's the other frustrating thing for our first time runners. Yeah. Be careful. Don't get caught up. Depending on when you start, your time is going to be vastly different than the official time, because that official time is when those elites first run. So that's something that you got to be careful with. It can play mental mind games on you, both positive and negative, I think, if you don't understand that. So you just got to be careful. But, if you miss your start time, you're going to run. Like, they're going to run. Unless you sleep until 12 o'clock, then you're right. Totally out of luck there. A couple of things that I would add to this, Vin, and I love how you said, you went for a walk, is I think distractions are really, really good. And I think, not to tout us, but for our runners, and there's so many charity runners in Chicago, that are doing events the day before, whether it's a dinner or meet and greet, shakeout runs. There was a 5K that morning. We possibly will have a shakeout run for our team, but distractions are really good, right? Like, that's a great way to distract yourself, going for a walk, being involved in team events, going to the expo. Now, naturally, you don't want to walk 26 miles the day before. For some people, that works really well. For other people, they really need that rest. Some people, can do the volume, and, that's how they get loose, and then they get ready and stuff like that. But I think distracting yourself, great idea. Number 2 is have a plan. And what do I mean by that is, try to do some prior planning before you get to Chicago, in terms of where you might eat on Saturday, where you're going to meet up with friends and family after the race. I think the more stuff that you do ahead of time, the better prepared you will be to have a really good experience, regardless of what your race time is. And on that note, my last thing here that I would throw in is just arrive ready. And what do I mean by that is, we always tell our runners, make sure, like, if you use a particular gel or a particular fuel, bring that with you. Yeah. Naturally, we're still pretty far out to see what the weather's going to be like, but you probably want to start putting away some throwaway clothes at this point, because, there's been years where it has been cool in the morning. And, we set up, which we'll get to here in a bit, like, where we set up is pretty early on in the race at one of our cheer stations. And, usually people look a lot different when we see them the second time, because they've warmed up and they've thrown off a top, they've gotten rid of gloves, hats, whatever the case may be. Certain years it's been drizzling a little bit. So you just want to arrive ready. I always tell our runners and tell friends that do these marathons, whether it's Chicago or any of these other big marathons, is you want to show up there race day ready to go with your nutrition, your clothing. Always bring, even Chicago's pretty funny with the weather, right? Like there's been years, I think we started in full gear and then stripped down to like a t-shirt,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Like we've had jackets on early and then it got so warm. So you really have to, and I mean, I've been to Chicago where, the first day I was there, it was bright and sunny. The next day it was snowing, and so, you could have these crazy weather shifts. So I just like to say arrive ready from the clothing department, from your nutrition needs. Don't necessarily rely on getting stuff at the expo or locally. And the same could be said. I know this is a little bit difficult, I should say, for some people with travel, but nutrition, you brought up nutrition, right? And we're all kind of creatures of habit at this point. If you've been training 12 weeks or 16 weeks, you've created these habits in terms of what your routine is. I would say stay in that. Like you said, don't change what you're doing. But if that means like, hey, you have to bring a bagel or you have to bring a particular peanut butter with you, like don't rely. That's another thing, right? Like there's Trader Joe's, there's Whole Foods, but especially now with supply chain issues, like, hey, if you like Trader Joe's crunchy peanut butter before you run on a bagel, I'm sure you could find bagels. Like I would maybe bring a jar of Trader Joe's crunchy peanut butter. Like if that's what you're fueling up before you go to run, I would bring it. And, naturally people who have diet issues or, nutritional issues where they can't, eat particular things, that's something to also think about. Like, again, just don't think you're going to show up in Chicago. It is a big city and find the things that you need. We were just there a couple of weeks ago and it's wild. We're still dealing in this pandemic world that a lot of places are still very closed, are still closed and haven't reopened in certain parts of the city, like CVS and Walgreens and some of the other big box chains like Target. So what traditionally would have been an easy, hey, I'll walk down the block to Walgreens and pick up some peanut butter, some Band-Aids, maybe some anti-chafing stuff. That might not be as easy as it was back in 2019 and in previous years. So just come ready, arrive ready. I think that's like the biggest key, maybe overarching here is just be ready and don't rely on when you get there. All right, let's break down this course and race day. So I'm going to go ahead and share our screen. We're actually going to go over the course. We have the course map up. And so boom, there we go. The course is up. So I think one of the cool things about this race and the world major that Chicago is, as I zoom in here, is the start and the finish, right? Finish in the same general vicinity. But what's cool about Chicago, and I've run a lot of world major races, is that it's pretty accessible from the city. So if you're staying in the city, which there's a gazillion hotels, or even if you're staying a little bit further outside the city, whether it's up north or out west or even down south, their mass transportation system's still very good. And I know that runs on race day. And so, it's pretty easy to get to the start. And I do think that is one of the advantages if we compare this to like a Boston or a New York, where they're point to points and you have to get to that start line somehow, whether it's a train, whether it's a bus, a boat, and then you've got to get to the finish line. With Chicago, everything's kind of right in that park there, in that general vicinity here. And getting to the start is actually really cool, I think. And what I mean by that is the year that I ran it, I actually used that start procession, I guess you would call it, from the hotel that we were staying at, which was about a mile from the start line, as my warm up, and just really kind of warmed up and got into the corral. And then I was like, almost like just getting into like that loose stretch, getting my body stretch, using the bathroom and doing my final hydration. So I think that's really, really unique for a race this size, that you have the ability to get in there pretty quickly, all things considered, being, it's a 40,000 plus race.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I didn't walk there, even though we could have, from where we stayed. I took, but speaking on what you were mentioning, like with the mass transit, like I took their, train, system, 5 minutes, whatever it was, down there. I was in the corral, and I didn't necessarily, when I got to that start area, I did, my warm up, like walking. I think I paced the street, walked up and down, a couple blocks. I didn't go right into the corral to get started. So I did it a little bit different, but echoing what you said, it was extremely easy to get there. I was anxious about that. What if I get on the wrong train? But it was super easy to get there. Got off, just walked up and down, where that park is a few times. Then was like, okay, it's showtime. It's game time. Let's go into the corral. Let's get ready. Tons of bathrooms if you have to go. You have to go. Lots of room. I think there was. The year I did it in 19, there was plenty of room to stretch and, do whatever you needed to do in that area. So extremely, extremely easy to get to and, get started. And they move you through that, pretty, I haven't done any other marathons, but, they move and have a really good system as each corral is moving forward as they go out, and it was very well organized.
Yeah, they're a world major for a reason,
Yeah.
and I think they do it as good as the rest, and so it's pretty amazing to do that. So the one thing I'll add here as we move on from the start is, like I said before, if you miss your corral time and don't get in the corral, do not stress. You can always go to the back. The clock does not start. Your time does not start until you start the race and cross that start line and your chip goes off. So again, don't stress. You're going to run the race, and the time is your time. And most people aren't running for winning the race anyways. So those people get a VIP escort to the start, and those guys go off when they're supposed to go off. But, as you start, you shoot out of the gate. It's awesome. You go over the first bridge, and then really that second bridge, Vin, which is like right around like mile 1.5 before the historic Chicago Theater, right there on the river, is just an area that we're going to mention because that's where you'll see the Project Purple flags up in the air on the right side of the bridge, if you're running. So I know in years past, so that bridge is funny because that's the State Street Bridge there. It has the divider in the middle, right?
Stay to the right.
Stay to the right. And so what everyone does is they stay to that left if you're running, because that is the closest distance. But as the waves begin to get bigger and bigger and bigger, we start to see people gravitate to that right. Yeah. What do we say? We always say, look for the Project Purple flag. We've got these telescoping flag poles with the Project Purple flag. You have someone dressed in purple on the bridge. And so that's something that, we always tell the runners to look for, in terms of, on the race course there. And so that's
when you turn that corner right around mile 1, you're going to take that left. You're only a few blocks away from that bridge. And as soon as I turned that corner, I was trying to spot the flag. It was still a little far out, but I was looking for it. And then you were in my head, stay to the right, stay to the right. So I just eased my way over there. Yeah. And it made it so much. It is the start of the race. So your adrenaline's already high. And then I think you could hear Dino on the speaker from turning that corner, if I'm not mistaken. But, then you just see the Project Purple people, and, that adrenaline kicks in a lot more, which I'll get into on the next bridge. But it definitely stay to the right there, because we want to see you. We want to grab pictures. And if you're over on that left-hand side, it's more of like a crapshoot if we can snag your picture with our photographers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Vin, this year, we hope to have a big surprise for everyone in Chicago with us. So we hope that they'll be able to hear us loud and clear. Right. So as you go through there, then, you wrap around the lower part of the city, not lower part, but in that upper loop. And then you take that hard right onto LaSalle. Yeah. And so traditionally we have tried to get to LaSalle this year. Depending on staffing, that could be a possibility or not, but look for that Project Purple flag. That's around mile 3, or right before mile 3 on LaSalle. And I always, Chicago is really unique in the sense that the marathon itself is really if you've never gone to Chicago, gives you really the flavor of
Yeah.
Chicago from the neighborhoods. And this is kind of the cool thing about this race. And this is kind of where I think the race transitions a bit here, because you do get to see downtown, right? You're on the start of the race, over to State Street, then you're into Jackson Boulevard there. You take some turns in that loop area and you see some of the bigger historic buildings, and then you hit LaSalle, and naturally now you're going north. And as you go north and you cross the bridge is really where you get into some really cool neighborhoods. And as you head north on LaSalle, up to really the Gold Coast is really a cool area where you have Boys Town, where they have lots of performances. It's a more residential area as well. And you just kind of really see kind of the flavor of the city, in a sense, from that northern perspective of the race.
Yeah, that's exciting to see, because every town, like you mentioned, has their own little flair, and they come out. Some of these towns come out, and comparing it to New York, right? In a sense,
Well, the
like, they come
boroughs,
out and
yeah.
they explain, they tell you what they're all about, and it's fun to see. It takes your mind off of what you're doing. Now you're at mile 10, 11, and you're taking in people cheering for you, the performers. It keeps your mind off things, and it's fun. I don't want to say running a marathon, I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's fun to see all this stuff going on and see all these people in different flavors, like you said, in all these areas, to
Yeah.
keep you motivated.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So that upper section, which is the northern part, which is like around mile like 7 to 9, is Boys Town.
Yep.
You've got a lot of performances there. It's Wrigleyville up in that area. So, you get that Chicago Cub flair up in that area. And then as you start to traverse and come down more further south, you head into the Lincoln Park area, which has become this like thriving area for young professionals. There's many great restaurants. So, and again, a lot of residences. So a lot of those people tend to come out, and those sections really, really are cool and unique to each other. And then you head into Old Town, which you now start to come back into like Chicago proper, Chicago, the city, right?
Yep.
And you get into the River North area, which is known for its restaurants and bars, hotels, residences now. And that's where, just before mile 13, as you cross the Well Street Bridge, is our second official cheer zone, which is as people come off the bridge there, you'll see us there, from that standpoint. And that's kind of a cool area because it's at like mile right before 13. Right. And so again, we're on that right side. This bridge is a little bit easier because it's just one bridge. But we'll be there as you come off the bridge onto Wacker there. And, I think this is kind of a pivotal point, because the halfway is really kind of not where the wheels tend to fall off, but, the first part of the race, I feel, you've got the energy, you've done the training, you're there, but this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? Like this is where, and this is kind of what we like to say here, as I zoom into this section here, is like, we're like right here, right around this left-hand turn here.
We're right on that turn. Yeah.
Right on that turn. And, I think that's where we kind of are there to push the athletes through the next 13 miles, right? And give them that motivation. But that's kind of like a turning point in the race, because you do go out of the city. You start to venture out west and go down south, which it's a different dynamic, right? And so for us, it's really kind of an opportunity to kind of push the runners through the next 13 miles.
Yeah. And I mean, again, speaking from experience on my end, I mean, I started to feel it there. Like you said, they weren't falling off yet, but I started to feel it there. So coming around that, I believe we take a right to come onto Wacker. Seeing you guys there, seeing the crowd, Christina was there. I still get flack to this day for not stopping and giving her a hug. But there was no way I was stopping. I was just keeping going. But as you mentioned, then you start coming south. And that was one thing that stuck out for me, was seeing you guys right around 13, and then you shoot out, to the United Center and out there, and
Yep.
it does get pretty quiet out there. There's not a lot out there, so having you guys in the cheer zone there, was able to push me to be able to get out there, keep that motivation going. And then you start turning back and you start coming through again some more of these communities. So that's a great location from a personal standpoint.
Yeah, I think this stretch, and I'll share my personal experience here. When I ran the race, like right around like 14 here, you can see the marathon through the side streets, right?
Yep.
And that really plays a trick on you, right? So this stretch here from like 14, once you make this turn at the United Center, and they usually have like the mascot there for the Chicago Bulls, right?
The cheerleaders were out
there.
there.
The cheerleaders. So it starts to get pretty cool, and then you come into this universe. Like this, I think personally, there's two stretches here that really kind of grind. One of them is here from 14 to like 16. I think once you turn the corner there, then like, hey, you're in the home stretch. And then as you get into the university area and Greektown, that gets really cool. There's the university, then you've got Little Italy, which then brings you into the Pilsen area, and then Chinatown, which is just really, really cool. Like I think Chinatown's like one of the coolest parts on the race, but I would say like 14 to 16, just because of that, for me, mentally, seeing runners going the opposite direction, because you can see them through the side streets.
And you think it's going to come up quick. And you
correct.
When's this turn coming?
Yeah. You're like, where do I turn? Where do I take this left turn? You're like, oh my God. That to me was mentally a hard section. And then my other section, which I kind of don't, and this kind of goes in with marathon, where I kind of hit the wall a little bit, is like 22 to 23, because when you take this turn here at 22, right around the 35K mark, you've only got a couple miles left, right? Like you've got really 4 miles left, a little bit over a 5K, but the trick that plays with your mind here for me was I could see the skyline again at this point, and I was like thinking, all right, I'm going to go right here and then left, but then you have to take this right down Michigan. And then once you make that turn there, like, you're in the home stretch at like mile 23, 24. And so that, I would say for me, those two pieces are really the hardest, is like that 14 to 16 and that 22 to 23. And, that latter part, the 22, 23, I think I hit the wall, as they say. And it does get kind of quiet a bit in this section. I think there's a Venezuelan section or community, Ecuadorian community after Chinatown, which is really cool. And they come out. But those are kind of areas to kind of, as we say, like, watch yourself a bit, because you are going to need that extra push during those times. But once you get through this 14 to 16, it does get really cool and really amazing. And I think, the excitement of Chinatown will carry you through, so hopefully that gets you through. And I think, Vin, once you take this turn back going north on the course, the race really gets really cool. When you get back on Michigan, it is pretty, the last 2 miles of the race are just awesome.
That's what I was going to say. So I hit the wall at 18 when I did mine. 18 to 19 was when I hit my wall. Hamstring started tightening, all that good stuff. I had to do the walk run thing. But, again, just like you're saying, you take that turn at 23 and mentally you're like, I have 2.5 miles to go. You hit 24. And I think my last 2 miles, I don't know if it was the crowd, if it was, coming back into the city, knowing that the finish line was only 2 miles away. I just did 24, 2 miles. What's 2 miles? My last 2 miles were like my best miles. Didn't stop. And then as soon as it took that turn, even with that little hill coming up to the finish line, there's that, it might even be like a 50-foot hill. It's not that big. It felt like it was huge, but it's not that big. It felt great going up it, felt great coming down it, and then you're downhill to the finish line, really, and you're just cruising. But
I think, in Michigan Ave there at the finish is lined, pretty much for those 2 miles. And the great thing is, restaurants, hotels, residences all along Michigan. everyone's out cheering, and that is like the runner's moment, right? Like you've
Yeah.
made it this far, it's your moment to shine. And I think to your point, like taking that right turn to the finish, and the irony is it's like 800 to go, but you got to go up a hill, right? And it like mentally messes with you, right? So like once you get to like, I think it's like that tail end of Michigan, you start to
Yeah.
see like 1600 meters to the finish, 1,000 meters, you start seeing the signs. And I think when you take that right hand turn, it says 800 to go, but you're like, holy cow, there's a hill. And
Yeah.
it is not that big of a hill, but at mile 26, it's a big hill, right? Like it's just like,
Exactly.
some of these other events, like New York has Fifth Ave, which, is in that tail end. And Fifth Ave, people don't realize like it's all uphill, on the upper east side there. So yeah, it kind of messes with you mentally. But to
Mhm.
your point, once you get to that left hand turn to the top of the hill, it's all downhill,
It's
literally.
like you have skates on. You're just
Yeah,
like gliding down that hill.
yeah.
And that was one thing, like you're saying on Michigan Ave, if I remember correctly, like they even like, and I don't know if this is at every race, like towards the finish line, but they almost like the roads some sort of narrow
Narrows in, yeah,
where they're
yeah.
bringing you in, which again, you start to spread out on some of these where not that you're by yourself, but people are spread out away from you. The crowds, if you're running in the middle, they're on each side. They're far away. But then the road starts narrowing. They have that filter coming in, cones to bring everybody a little bit closer. Now you're next to other runners. The crowds are literally right on top of you, it feels like, and that pushes you down that 26 to the finish.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I think the one thing that's really cool about Chicago, as we mentioned before, like you start and finish in the same area, right? So the finish, you cross that finish line, you're still in the park, you get your medal, you can go have is it Stony Creek or no, what, not Stony Creek's in Connecticut. It's the
That's Goose Creek.
Goose Creek.
Goose
Yes,
Creek.
Goose Creek Bear. They've got a cool area there. There's plenty of hospitality and stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm going to stop sharing here because we've done our course preview. Let's talk about the finish here. And, you come through that finish line. As I said, you get your medal, you get your beer. And then, there are some hospitality tents available for people if you buy extra tickets. But there's really a cool area. And I think that's like the one cool thing. At some point, I believe public is allowed into the park. You still have to go through security. There is a friends and family area there where you can have as a to reunite with friends and family. We always suggest, because of Chicago, as we mentioned, the pro of so many hotels and restaurants so close to that start finish line. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to have that meetup offsite, right?
Right.
Now, that's not always great for the runner, right? Because they've got to walk further,
Yeah.
and especially if you're hurting, that's going to take you a little bit longer, but it's also a good idea because you kind of get away from the crowds, right? And so there might be a Starbucks or a hotel lobby, maybe a block or two away, or maybe a little bit further. That makes it ideal to meet up.
Yeah, I think and for me, we had the after party then that in that
Correct.
year. It was the year before COVID. So there weren't any restrictions or anything like that. But I mean, I remember Christina was in the friends and family area, and then we met up, at a corner, like you said. I think it was, whether it was a Starbucks or something, I forget. We, instead of her following me, running through the crowds trying to find each other, we went across the street, met there, and then walked back to the hotel, changed, relaxed, and met everybody else up. So I think that's a great point to say, because it can get crowded down there, and trying to spot people in the crowd and everything. And I mean, I wasn't on my phone. We weren't texting. I don't know. I just didn't even want to have my phone on me, but so I was trying to find people, and it was difficult. There was just a lot of people. You're at the finish line. Savor that moment, though. You cross that finish line. It's take pictures, be proud of that medal that you have, enjoy every second of that.
That's a great point. The other thing that I want to just throw in here, Chicago was an early race, right? Like
Yeah.
by 7:30, everyone has started the race.
Yeah.
So people finish pretty early. So that's another thing to think about, and for those that have done other races, like Boston starts really late, New York starts really late, Chicago starts really early. So think about that when you're planning. And I think that's the other thing that this has an advantage to, like restaurants are open. So, your family and friends might be starting the day a little bit early in terms of entertaining themselves while you may be finishing, and then maybe they can meet you nearby, because again, there are a lot of restaurants up and down that area by the park there, by the start finish. Great stuff. And I want to end this, and I know this is always kind of a loaded question, but something that we haven't mentioned that maybe we could mention, or maybe something we had, what would be like your number one tip or number one advice piece for anyone running the marathon, Chicago in particular?
Oh, for me, honestly, it's take out the headphones and enjoy the moment. And whenever I say that to somebody, they all look at me like, how could you do that? How did you do that? Type of thing. So when I started training, being competitive, I was looking at my watch. I was looking at, my heart, like everything. I was too much in my head, and the sounds in my head, maybe I didn't want to listen to a song, and I didn't want to be fumbling around, or a podcast. So during my training runs, I just ixed the headphones, took off my watch and just went off of heart rate. I don't know if that's something everybody should do. That was something that worked for me, because if I looked at my watch and saw that I was doing a 10, 11 minute mile, I was like, oh, I can do a 9. And then I'd push it a lot more. So enjoy it. You've always said, like, we're not going to finish first. Yes, people want to break their times, or, maybe some people are BQing or doing that kind of stuff, or they're looking for certain times. That's great. But enjoy the moment. Take those headphones out and take in the sound, the scenery, take in the views. Whether it's raining or not, there's going to be beautiful views, right? And we're all out there for a reason, and we're running because we have been affected by this thing called pancreatic cancer. So I just kept thinking about that. I kept, using that as motivation, and, being present in the moment. Even though my hamstrings hurt, even though my feet hurt, I'm present. I'm here. I'm doing this. And my uncle can't. My uncle's not here with me, but he was still there with me, but he was helping push me through it. So if you can, not saying that if you've trained with headphones the whole time to take them out the day before the race, because you don't want to change things up too much, but try it. Try it for a couple miles, try it for a little bit, turn off the headphones and just take in everything that's around you.
Vin, you said this perfectly, and I had that written down, and so I'm going to shift mine, and you nailed it, man. But the race itself will have over 10,000 charity runners. They're all great causes. And I just wrote down, remember the why, right? Because when you hit the wall, that'll really pull you through. There's so many great causes, and naturally ours, pancreatic cancer. And I selfishly say this, I think we have the greatest cause of any charity, and would debate that till cows fly over the moon. But I know there's many charities that do some amazing work. They all do, actually, and are helping millions and millions of people worldwide. But just remember that why, I think, is important, to add to what you said. I think if you, to your point, enjoy the moment, take it in, get lost in it, whatever you got to do, and then remember why you're running that day. If you do those two things, I think you'd have a hell of experience and really, enjoy every single step of that 26.2.
Yeah. And I mean, if I could go with another, like 1A, don't go out too fast. Then it's going to be
we have not said
don't
that.
Go out, don't.
Yeah.
I think my first mile was like 8 or 7 or something. It was like, whoa, slow down, type of thing. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great one, Vin. And that's one that we forgot to mention before. So that is a very good one. Do not go out too fast. Drop back if you have to. Do whatever you got to do to kind of pace yourself so the excitement of it and the adrenaline doesn't get the best of you. Vin, thank you for once again being on the Project Purple podcast. We are excited. We hit the road very soon. Actually, as we record this, we've got a team in Berlin this year. We've got teams. Wow. Let's go through this listing.
And the Chicago half.
Chicago half marathon, Berlin marathon, Chicago half marathon, Twin Cities marathon, London marathon, Sono half marathon, Chicago marathon, and then the New York City marathon. So we've got a busy couple weeks ahead of us. We cannot wait to celebrate, cheer our teams, be as excited and crazy on race day. And we cannot wait to meet as many of our runners. I think this is really a special time of year for us because we get to really meet the people that allow us to do the great things we do, thank them in person, and then cheer for them and celebrate with them post with as many as possible. So we cannot wait. I'm really excited. It does feel a lot different this year than last year. It feels a lot normal. I say normal here in air quotes for those that watching. But I think there's something special about this year. And I don't know if that's because of the pandemic and we've rebounded so quick here with the excitement and people and maybe because we are doing so many great things on our end. And so I'll leave the audience with this thought. During the pandemic, everyone thought like this was it, right? Like there were probably not everyone, but there were a lot of people, in a lot of industries that were impacted dramatically, ours included. And so, last year was like trying to figure out, is this for real? Is this not for real? Are these events going to come back on full time? Are they going to look like they did in 19? And now that they do that, I think it's almost a thing that you realize how special this is and how these moments are. And knowing also though, that, hey, this could be taken away from us at any point in time. Right. Mm-hmm. So it makes it that much more special, that much more important. So with that, Vin, thanks for being on the podcast. We look forward to Chicago and all of our races. And as we say here at Project Purple, thanks for listening. This is a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like what you hear today, feel free to share this episode. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on our YouTube channel for some wonderful content. And until next time, please be safe. Thanks for listening and watching to the Project Purple podcast.